Well, welcome aboard this morning. If it's 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, a little bit early for us today because of our guest, and we wanted to accommodate his schedule today. So we're on just a little bit early. So if you're listening to us, watching us on the live, we want to welcome you. And if you're watching the replay, hopefully you're going to get a lot of value out of this. And I can guarantee you there's a lot of value coming to you today here on the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network. So, Sheryl, what's your thoughts on the information we're getting ready to share with our listeners today?
Well, as you know, it's on branding, and your brand is what people know you by when you're not there. So I think everyone needs to listen to this, whether they have retail business or whatever type of business they have. And I think even a single entity person needs to think about this.
Yeah, that's dead on the money. And it was really neat today as we talked to our guest right before we came on. And I'll share you a couple things that I've just learned about him that I wasn't even aware of. Today's guest is a gentleman by the name of Dan Antonelli. He's from a kind of a remote rural section of New Jersey, believe it or not. And he has a company, and it is known as Kickstart Creative. Now, where did I hear Dan's name? Will be honest with you. One of my good friends that I follow is a guy by the name of Tommy Mello. And Tommy, if you follow him, you know he does some really remarkable things in the home service contracting world. So a couple of weeks ago, I had the honor, the pleasure, the privilege to speak at his vertical track event in Phoenix, Arizona. So while I was there, I was able to meet Dan, get a conversation going with him, and we set up this broadcast for today. And it's all about branding. And in fact, Dan has recently released a book, and it's called Brand or Bland. And that's kind of what we titled this today. Because, like Sheryl said, your brand is what people know you by and how you're going to attract attention. And if you're planning to scale your business, then building that brand is all important. So stick around. We'll be right back and we'll have Dan on here and then we'll get started with today's interview process. Appreciate you being here today as always. So, good morning. Welcome aboard, Dan. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule today and
Hey,
being with us and hopefully sharing some great information. Brandy's a little delayed coming in this morning. She had an appointment, so she may be joining us a little late. If not, Sheryl and I'll try to carry on without her. So, Dan, one of the things is, how did you get into creating brands? Tell us a little bit about Dan's background and how you got started in this ball game.
sure. It's really ironic, but one of the first vehicles that I got involved in when I was younger, so I started out as someone that was really into lettering and pinstriping, and then people would ask me to do signs, and then people started asking me to do truck lettering on them. And believe it or not, the one of the very first vehicles I did was for a company in Staten Island, New York. And it was called the Firebird Sweep. And it was a chimney sweeping company. No lie. Like, I swear to God, like I have pictures of it. I could show you guys pictures of me lettering this van. And so I think at the time I was probably 16 years old. And he brought the van to my house, and I hand painted the lettering on the side of his van in my backyard. And I never forget, because it was like a bird flying out, holding the chimney sweep, and it was related to some kind of musical thing. There was like some kind of symphony or orchestra or a concert. And that's what inspired the name. I kind of remember that. But I literally took the guy's business card and just blew it up on like a photocopy machine, and then did the lettering based on that. So I started, lettering vans and things like that when I was very young. And my parents didn't think it would be a good idea for me to be a sign painter. So they said, why don't you go to college? And so I did, and I studied advertising at the University of Scranton, actually, and got a degree. And then I worked as a graphic designer. And then a few years later, I started the business basically while I was still working full time. And so 8, I think it's 28 years now, still doing it. So it's kind of crazy.
Well, that's when you were talking about all that. A lot of people don't even know, but that's what you used to do was you hand lettered. In fact, I remember, and I
Yeah.
learned a good lesson. Whenever you've got a sign painter that's going to letter your truck, you better understand he needs to know how to spell. And I'll tell you why that came up. We had a tagline, and it was, "We have the cure for your flu." And he shortened from your to yo flu. And that's how we ran around for years. But from what you just said, you've been through it from hand lettering, which goes back, probably went into vinyl lettering, I'm
Yep.
guessing from there. And
Yep.
now the big thing is the full truck wraps as we see people doing today. Am I correct?
Exactly. Yeah. And I had the blessing to work under a very well, um, like he was just a master sign painter. And so, you learn so much about that outdoor medium when you're actually sitting there hand lettering it. And so issues such as legibility and colors and contrast were all lessons I learned very, very early on. And a lot of those lessons are really still prevalent in the work that we produce today. I think that's one of the things that's missing from a lot of truck wraps today is, as simple as it sounds, just being legible, right? Sometimes there's so much stuff going on some of these truck wraps, and you can't really understand quickly at a glance what the company does. So just extremely blessed and fortunate to have worked physically in that environment, because it's very different when you're designing something on a computer screen versus when you're physically in that medium and in that space. And I think the lessons that I learned there have definitely helped shape our style and what we believe in as far as how brands need to live and breathe in an outdoor environment.
Yep, I got you. So, Sheryl, I'm going to turn it over to you, but so you're aware, Dan, I've got your website page that I'm going to share in a minute. That's going to show a lot of examples of what
Okay.
we're talking about here because you're very clear. And one of the things that I do is in a business analysis, I look at this branding. I'm looking at the trucks. I'm looking at it. And it's amazing how many people I'm going to say are camouflaged from their market areas because they don't have that rolling billboard that clearly identifies what they do. So,
Yeah.
Sheryl, your turn.
Well, first, as a statement, I agree with him. You can have way too much on the van, and it takes your eyes away. You can be camouflaged with nothing, or honestly, I think you can be camouflaged with too much.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
doing it like you do, you're able to see it. Do you ever change someone's opinions or their colors or anything if it does not work within their market? Since do you have that much availability?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, almost every client that we take on, we're changing either radically or fairly substantially where they started from. And you look at things like color in their market. You look at things like even what the visuals are personifying about the business. We look at what the brand promise is inferred in the visuals as well. So if I'm a homeowner and I'm judging this company by what I see as a visual presented to me, what is my takeaway? What do I think I'm going to get? Will I get a premium product? Will I get an honest and trustworthy contractor that shows up to my house? Do I feel all those elements of promise in that brand? And if not, then those are elements that we want to look to try to address and fix. And the vast majority of companies have brands that are what I would say are either neutral, where I don't necessarily feel positive or negative. I don't really feel anything. It's just maybe it's a white van with black lettering on it, and it's not really giving me any vibe or feeling. Or I could actually look at it and I actually have a negative impression. So the idea of what any brand is meant to do is really to try to control what happens before you ring the doorbell. So if I want the homeowner to believe something about the expectation that they will get from your business before you even arrive there, and if I can control that perception and make that perception be positive, then you are more likely for, if you are the owner, to really win that job, increase your average tickets, things like that go along with what the perception the homeowner has. I mean, if you show up in ripped jeans and a white van with a magnetic sign, well, I don't think you're going to be able to get premium dollars for your work, because it doesn't appear to me that I should be paying you a premium dollar.
No. So Dan, let me ask you this. Whenever you are suggesting someone that they change this total look, because we're not just talking the truck wrap here, we're talking the overall brand, which means everything that the customer sees. This is their letterheads, their invoices, their logos, and the colors that go together to do it properly, to bring the forethought out. Do people fight you on your ideas, or are they pretty well, do they say, okay, you're the man, go ahead and do it? What is the usual course of action you follow?
Well, generally speaking, if they're coming to us, they've already accepted the notion that they need to have a fairly significant change, and they're ready for that change. But then when you do have people that just contact us, and they love the work that they see on our website, they love all the beautiful truck wraps that we've done, and then they say, we want something like that, and here's my logo. And then you look at the logo, and there's really absolutely no way we can create something that will be similar in nature to the work that they see on our website. And those are the times when we'll have that conversation about, hey, this isn't going to work. Here's why it's not going to work. And frankly, I'm not going to take money from you to do something that I know actually isn't going to work. So at that point, you have a choice. You can either go on with what you have, and I'm sure someone else will be happy to take your money, or you can go with us, and then certainly we're going to change the way in which your brand is presented, and fix all the challenges that are wrong with it.
And as I looked at your website preparing for this and doing my research, and even as we look at you right now, yellow is a big part of your brand. Just like I'm a yellow guy. Okay, we use yellow, we use green, we use gold. But if you're looking, even the chair you're sitting in right now has got yellow to it, and you see it. And like, I had a client one time, was very, very successful, and I told him going in, we needed to rebrand. And he rebranded with the color purple. And the purple was great because he was based in Baltimore, and the purple was the color of the Baltimore Ravens. So it was going from the normal white van with just a little bit of lettering to a fully wrapped vehicle and putting together. But again, a lot of people are not going to, I'm going to call it a branding expert. They may be using their website people for this, but realistically, this is a creative skill. Am I correct?
Yeah, 100%. And just the lesson that you're just talking about right there is exactly what you're trying to do, is have a brand color that is not oversaturated in your particular market. So he probably has one of the only purple branded vehicles in that particular space. So when the homeowner sees that vehicle, obviously the idea is to try to have them only recognize that as a representation of that one company. And that's kind of the problem that you have with so many companies that are either using white vans, right? So there isn't anything about that white van that I can claim ownership to, or they're using colors like red, white, and blue, for example, which are color schemes that traditionally you really can't own anyway, right? So it's going to be associated with many other types of things, whether it's Americana, whether it's the 5 other heating and air companies that are in that particular market, whatever the case may be. So, the idea of disruptive branding is really trying to think about how I can put something out on the street, which is uniquely identifiable to my business alone. So you become more top of mind for the homeowner when they're ready for service. And I think that's the other thing that people don't understand, is the relationship between the outward messaging, right? The truck wraps, and how that actually affects the rest of your digital marketing and the rest of your overall marketing strategy. So people think, or tend to think, that the purpose of the truck wraps are so that someone's driving by and they see it, and they're expected to call you right away and say, oh my God, like, I saw your van and I need this. Now that does happen, but the reality is most of the transactions happen later. So when they are thinking about needing that service, then they can say, hey, I remember seeing that van. The name of that company was this company. and they Google the company name as opposed to Googling chimney repair Baltimore, right? So the idea is to win the top of mind so that the branded keywords show up, more readily, of course, than a generic search query.
Got you covered. So welcome, Brandi. We're talking about branding today. I explained you were coming in a little bit late. So Sheryl, what would be your next question? Then Brandi, I'm going to go to you so you can ask your questions. Okay. So Sheryl, what's your next one? And while you're doing this, I'm going to pull up a page from Dan's website to see some of these brands he has built and designed. So go ahead, Sheryl.
Dan, I do a lot of hiring for especially a certain niche, but how can you put in to your vehicles or whatever something that will attract? Usually you're looking to attract customers. What about attracting employees? What draws their draft in?
Yeah, 100%. And Cheryl, like that question is great because it's the benefit that goes along with rebranding. It's sort of like most people don't come to us and say, "Oh my God, Dan, we want to rebrand because we want to create a better culture for our team." It's more like, "Hey, I want to be noticed. I want to increase sales. I want to increase revenue," right? But the hidden sort of value and benefit of it is that it does help with recruitment. It does help with culture because it instills the idea that this is a place that I want to work for and that I'd be proud to represent. And that's a lot of the challenge you see when the common complaint in home services is that I can't find anyone to work for me. No one wants to work for me. And then if you dig a little bit deeper and you look at sort of the messaging that they're putting out and what their visuals look like, what kind of van are you going to drive? What kind of uniform are you going to have to wear? And a lot of times there's challenges there. Okay. And listen, pay is obviously a motivating factor for many employees, but there's some clients, that honestly don't have recruitment problems because it looks like a place that I want to be a part of. It looks like a place that I want to join. Like Tommy Mello does not have the same recruitment problems that most garage door companies have. Well, why is that? How did that happen? Because it looks like an amazing place. It looks like a place that I want to be a part of. And all that stems from how the brand personifies those ideals.
Got you covered. So Brandi, and this is really interesting because Brandi works both as a coach with us, but she's also with her husband runs a service company in Kansas City by the name of Blues Brothers. And Brandi, y'all actually changed your brand a little bit when you changed website companies a couple of years ago. So what questions would you have for Dan?
Yeah, and ours, I don't feel like ours was a huge change. And I apologize for I'm late. I had a client meeting run late. So I guess if I ask anything that's already been asked, just let me know. But my first question was, how much does an average branding cost, a rebranding? Because I'm feeling like there's so much, letterhead, your building, your vans, there's just so much to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like an average cost?
Well, certainly the size of the company, it will correlate to that. So the more vehicles you have, you're still looking at $4,000 or $5,000 per vehicle to rewrap them. So you have those costs. Sometimes the cost that, if you look at the digital marketing, you don't necessarily have to get an entire new website right off the bat. Certainly you want to change the logos if you can easily change the button colors to match your new branding and things like that. So that's generally not as expensive if you can keep some of the core elements intact there. And then as far as just the actual fees of getting a rebrand, I mean, those are going to range depending on the type of company that you would hire from, it could be anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000. Like it's really going to depend. But a lot of times we look at a rollout of a new brand as something that has to be done in phases because not every client can afford to just rip everything out that had the old logo. So there's always a period of time that both brands coexist. And I think as you roll it out, the most critical thing is just to make sure that customers know what is happening, right? So letting them know that you're going to start seeing some changes with our company. This is our new logo. This is our new truck wrap and branding. It's still the same great company. It's still a great service, but we rebranded to better serve you, and there's messaging that can go along with that. But we never really, recommend, from a budgetary standpoint, it's usually not logistically feasible to just suddenly strip everything away. But interestingly enough, I think after we've done the rebranding, most clients are really, really like they can't wait to get rid of everything that had the old stuff. So they're really motivated at that point to try to implement it across the board as quickly as they can, because they're usually really, really excited about it. But it's going to take some time. In an ideal world, within 6 months, if most of the things could be turned over, that's great. And then you also have to look at the longevity of the fleet and just say, well, this truck's already 5 years old. It's only got 2 years left. We're not going to rebrand this because it's not going to be cost effective for us to do so. So you measure all those things and just try to put the dollars where it's most important towards that.
So Brandi, one of the things that's always come to my mind is Flues Brothers pre-Brandi. Okay. And I made a visit to pre-Brandi Flues Brothers some years ago. And I came out to do an analysis. And it was really, do you remember those days when trucks nowhere looked alike? In fact, in my mind, I'm remembering a yellow truck that was sitting in the parking lot. And I used to tell Jeremy, you blow my mind because everything's so mismatched, but I can't argue with your financial success. You're doing good. But you guys in Kansas City at Flues Brothers, y'all have went through a tremendous change of your brand over the last 10 years. Would I be right or wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't tell you now how many times a day when I ask a customer how they heard about us, well, I see your vans all around town.
Yeah. So I'm on the screen right now, Dan. I've got a page out of your website. And what you can see here is some of the rebrands. Now, I'm going to pick one out of here specifically, and this one may amaze some people, but the one that I want to pick out is up the top, and that is Lee's, that is based in Fresno, California, and it is also recently opened in Las Vegas. Now, what's amazing about Lee's is Tom Howard, who works for Service Titan, as relates to all the contractors and a really great guy. And I've often asked him, I don't even know why you're working for Service Titan, because you got this Lee's Heating and Air with all these trucks running out in California. But what all did you change with Tom's, and why did Tom rebrand?
I think, it's funny because I have Tom's before in my book, but you guys may be able to see it if I can zoom in.
Okay. Yeah.
So he basically just had the white van. And so there was nothing really very visually interesting about it. And so we wanted to create something that had more interest, that had more impact, that looked more established. And, Tom's results too were really interesting in terms of, we talk about some of his results in the book, but how much additional call volume he wound up getting post rebrand. And so they changed very little about their overall marketing, but suddenly they were experiencing this huge increase in call volume that they really initially weren't even prepared for, in terms of knowing what generally happens every year at this particular time. And the lead sources that they were able to attribute them to, as you noted before, were really based on impressions from the truck. So Tom, I mean, what I love about Tom is he's just such a numbers guy, and he's so good about planning and strategizing and figuring out, really how to build a marketing plan and program. And yet this was something almost unexpected for him as far as the impact that this was going to have. And for him, like 41% probably doesn't even sound like it's a big number, but he's already, I think he's at 30 million or so, or 20 million. So it was revenue wise, it was a pretty substantial increase. Yeah.
When you're looking at some of these, keep it in mind, there is one on this page that does over $250 million a year in the HVAC industry, and that is Gatto. And he spoke at Virtual Track also. So Sheryl, what would you ask Dan next?
Okay, as we all know, a lot of people are not into change, and I'm talking about general public. Have you ever noticed or ever calculated the detrimental time from if somebody decides to go full boat change?
I mean, to date, honestly, we have never experienced a net decrease in revenue subsequent to a rebrand. It's never happened.
Right.
So, I think a lot of owners mistakenly believe they have more brand equity than they actually really do. Some of that's just wrapped around, they're so close to it, and they're so used to it. It's very comfortable to it. So we sort of call that the warm blanket syndrome, where, you're so used to it. It's very comforting. We're doing so well. Why would we ever change? And I look at those companies as prime candidates for a rebrand, because from an operational standpoint that they're doing really, really well, right? So they run an amazing company. They have great operations. They have great staffing. And they're still doing successful despite this poor brand. So in my mind, it's like, wow, it's awesome how well, Tom Howard's a great example. I mean, look how well Tom Howard's company was doing despite having not really such great branding. So that when you give them the right tools, that those are the companies that really, really explode. So, it becomes this really, really accelerated catalyst for positive change that happens afterwards. But we'll do maybe 250 rebrands this year. I think I have almost 2,500 that we've done. Honestly, I can't think of a single instance where we've either renamed and rebranded a company or just rebranded in general, and then have seen a net decrease in revenue subsequent to that.
Okay.
Right.
So, Brandi, what about you? What's your next question?
So I've always been interested in the people on the trucks. So there's a plumbing company here in Kansas City that it's not even a cartoon character. It's the actual previous owner of the company. So when do you decide whether to put the face of someone on a truck versus not?
I mean, there's a lot of things that would go into that decision-making process. You see sometimes the more historic companies like that have been around a very, very long time, maybe going in that direction, or featuring like the founder or something like that. Last name brands tend to more support that type of marketing endeavor. Like even looking at Gettle, the story of the boy holding the flashlight for Gettle is based on the owner's work that he did when he worked with his dad. So there was like a story behind the visuals. But sometimes it's not always the right answer. Even when we rebranded Tommy Mello, Tommy Mello was really the face of his brand. He had been featured previously on almost every piece of advertising. So there was a lot of equity in his persona that we didn't want to dismiss. And so he became integrated into the new brand, the new truck wraps and things like that. So you have to look at, sort of the pros and cons. Last name brands will tend to support that type of initiative more so than other names. But, it's, and you want to think about doing it in a way that, again, is unique. So if you're in a market where there's 4 or 5 other companies deploying a similar type of strategy, that's also something you have to really be very cognizant of. So before we launch any brand, the research is part of what we do. So we look at the market, we say, well, who are your top 5 to 10 competitors in your particular market? Who else in a different vertical is very strong or well branded in your community? What are the color scheme opportunities that we may have in your market? Meaning, what colors are not heavily saturated? And then what strategies are they using? Are they using clean and modern? Are they using mascot? Are they using nostalgia? What are they actually doing? And then you look at all that and you say, okay, because of all this, your opportunity lies in this particular strategy or this particular approach.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
And so it's really interesting. And Dan, one of the most interesting ones I recently saw, and I'm pretty sure you guys did it, it was a plumber's truck that had a picture of a dog on it, and the dog was holding a wrench in his mouth. And it just jumped out at me like, it's like when I look at it, both of these ladies are dog people. So when I look at that, to me, that's going to make Brandi and Sheryl smile when she sees that brand. Would that be correct?
100%. And to that point, Jerry, the most important demographic that your branding for a home service company should be targeting is women. They are making up 70 to 80% of the purchasing decisions. So creating brands that feel warm, inviting, trusting, are really, really critical. And that's why, you may have heard me speak about this, but the idea of some of these mascots that are developed that are so masculine in nature, that feel like they're so aggressive. The mascot's all muscled and he's running at you holding a pipe wrench. Those are not exactly too endearing to Mrs. Jones. She's already scared with who is coming to her home. Why do I want to make her feel more intimidated with who's coming to her home? So we try to say, sort of half jokingly, but try to think about brands and try to think about, if it was a fabric softener, would this still work? Right? Soften it, make it so that it appeals to women, because those are the ones making the decisions. So, we really try to avoid any type of aggressive stance or overly masculine color schemes. Like, we're really trying to think about the psychology behind the branding, and especially being very cognizant that the women are primarily the ones making those decisions.
Yeah, I understand. Brandi, what he just said, as a woman, does that ring in your mind what he just said? Well, your mic's off. So, Brandi, your mic.
It does very much. And I'm always trying to take a look at different people's branding. You brought up the dog, Jerry, that same plumbing company that has the owner of the face. I remember I went to a home show one year and they have a dog and they were giving out then stuffed dogs to match their dog. Yeah. We have a pest company here in town that's called Blue Beetle, and they literally drive around Volkswagen Beetles that are blue. And I just always thought that's just genius. So if somebody were, let's say somebody were to sign up for your services today and go through branding, how long does that process take to get a new brand? And do you go through like 5 versions, 10 versions?
So from the point that we would start with you, generally speaking, it's about a 4-week process, meaning it'll be about 4 weeks before you're ready to wrap your first truck from the time we start with you. We generally present usually 2 or 3 concepts. And again, those concepts will be based on the market research. It'll be based on a pretty comprehensive creative brief that we go over in depth with you. So we do, of course, want to discuss, well, what do you guys envision your brand to be like? Do you want it to be really, really fun? Or do you want to lean more towards being very serious? Or so we use obviously our website and other examples to try to really dial in what is the strategic approach that makes the most sense for not only you as an owner, but for that target demographic. And even that's an educational process, because a lot of times they start the process and they're like, I like this, my text like this, I want it to be cool for my friends. And they sort of forget about, it's not about you. It's about who we're actually selling to. Like, let's get inside their heads. Of course, like, obviously I want you to like your logo, but I'm more interested in what that homeowner is going to feel when they see your brand. So we have those discussions. And generally speaking, by the time we're done with that kickoff call, we have a very good idea in terms of directionally where this brand will go. And then we typically, almost every client is hiring us to do the brand along with the wrap design. And so we present options back to them, showing that brand on the actual truck. What we found very early on, like years ago, like probably a decade ago, we were only just showing them logos on a white piece of paper, let's just say, or a JPEG. And then they couldn't visualize how that was going to function actually on the truck. So then once we sort of really understood, well, like as designers, like we know exactly how it's going to function, but they're not really as in tune with that. So once they see, okay, this is approximately how big the mascot will be, this is approximately how big your name will be, here's the color schemes we're thinking about, it became a lot for people to really get it. And like, it made more sense seeing the brand executed like that.
Yeah. And Dan, what you're talking about here, and you don't actually do the wrapping, you do the designs, and you would
Correct.
Send that to their local supplier. So this is not a fact of you take the truck to New Jersey so you guys can wrap it. You're
Right.
doing it. But it reminds me of a franchise. And one of the franchises I've worked with is ServPro. And I was able to see the ServPro promotional marketing, where placement of everything on that truck is specified. The color of everything, the color of the uniforms. Whenever you look at it, depending on where you are in the company, of what color shirt that you wear. The technicians wear one kind, supervisors another, but it was everything. And that's what you're doing. You're basically building what's called a replicatable business that could be moved to somewhere else and that model used. So what you're saying is this is exactly one of the secrets of the franchise model, where when you buy the franchise, it's just like a Subway. If you buy a Subway franchise, they're going to tell you what colors, everything that goes in, to the fact of they send a contractor in to do the remodeling. So Sheryl, what else would you ask Dan about this branding and what he said a while ago about the woman being attractive? Did that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. The only thing that, I noticed, because especially in dealing with people that I'm hiring with, that they are always looking for designers. And Dan, I know that you are a busy, busy gentleman, even though there are multiple designing companies out there. I think you're probably one of the busiest ones that I've ever seen. So how long would it take if a new customer wanted to come in with you? What's your time frame before you can accept new customers?
Right now we're booking out about 5 months or so. What we did is we tried to slot out some openings for people, basically one per week. If people wanted to pay extra, basically to get in faster, almost like a rush fee. But for the most part, honestly, I'd rather not have to do that. But some people just couldn't wait. So we're like, well, how can we figure out how to accommodate like one person a week that can't wait? And that involved obviously some overtime for some staff and getting people to commit to working like on a day on the weekend, which, if the guys are okay with doing it, fine. But like normally it's about, like I said, about 5 months at this point to engage with us. And we just take a deposit to hold your spot. There's some research and some work that you would do before that kickoff call would happen. As a matter of fact, like we send everyone a copy of the book and we're like, you have to read the book before we'll actually even have the kickoff with you, because I want them to be educated on the process. I want them to understand the philosophy behind the idea of disruption and why we're going to be recommending certain things. So the more that they can really understand that too, the better. And even if someone can't hire us or can't work with us, I still think the book serves a great role for them because they can really better understand how this is supposed to work. And I don't think they're really, the reason why I wrote the book is because there isn't really a resource that speaks specifically to home service branding. There's a lot of books on branding, but they don't really talk specifically about why and how home service branding is really different than corporate branding or other types of branding, actually.
Yeah.
Do you have the book in front of you that you might
hold the book up, Dan, and tell people how they get this book? How do people order this book, Dan?
So they can get it through Amazon. It's a little more expensive through Amazon, or they could get it through our site at kickcharge.com/books.
Okay. Well, I've got your website listed up right now, so they can go to Amazon and get it, or they can go to it straight off of your website. But that's going to tell somebody the process here. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been presented with a case of someone coming, and just to be honest with you, the name of the company sucks? The name of the company. Have you ever suggested that part of the rebranding, they need to change their name? Because I did this last week on analysis. I felt that the name of the company was one that was actually not going to enable them to go to what they wanted to do.
I think at this point we'll do 50 renames this year. So, it's definitely something that we have that conversation usually very early on. And so if the name is something that I feel you're going to just need to spend a ton of money to basically overcome, then we'll have that conversation. We do a ton of brands for people that obviously don't want to change their names. There's a lot that goes into whether or not that makes sense for them. You have to look at revenue, you have to look at longevity, you have to look at current equity that maybe that name has and whether or not there's value in it, and then make a decision. So it's not very clear cut as far as, okay, no matter what, you have to definitely change the name, but there are criteria. So you would say, is it easy to spell? Can I pronounce it? does it give an inferred brand promise? Like, so, actually the book, the chapter on naming in the book is probably actually the biggest chapter, because I felt it was so important to talk about sort of the pros and cons and really what goes into developing a brand name that will actually function better in the long run. So, yeah, we definitely have those conversations. We, like I said, we do it very frequently, probably 1 or 2 a week. We do renames of companies. And personally, like when you have the opportunity to rename a company from a creative standpoint, it's nice because there's no baggage. Like there's nothing that I need to really try to work into this new brand. And I can think about names that will evoke very strong visuals. I can think about names that evoke very strong promises. And build something that I think will gain traction so much faster. So revenue is definitely a question mark, right? Where you say, well, if you're under 1 million, it's usually like, to me, it's like a no brainer. It's very easy. You're very nimble. It's very easy to shift at that particular point. If you've only been in business a couple of years or a few years, it's also still very easy and you're very nimble. But when you start pushing 10, 15 million in revenue and 10 years worth of history, it becomes more of a question, like a much harder question to really wrap your head around and say, are we going to change, or can we continue on this path? And of course, Roy Williams from Wizard of Ads has this great quote, and he says, overspending on marketing is the tax one spends for being unremarkable. And you can spend your way out of any poor brand. I mean, there's tons of companies that do it. The guys that are saying, and the owners that are saying, hey, we need to spend 10% of our budget on advertising. And I'm like, well, you probably need to spend 10% of your budget on advertising because you're unremarkable. So the more unremarkable you are, the more money you're going to need to spend. So you can still get by and do okay with a poor name and a poor brand. It just generally is going to cost you more money.
That's it. So Sheryl, what would be your last question for Dan today?
My last one would be, if you had a brand new client in front of you with no expectations, what would be your leading thing that you would want to tell this customer?
I would ask if they have a really good understanding about what the vision is for their company and how that vision will affect culture. And to give you an example, there's a company that we actually renamed. They were called PMA Mechanical. And we renamed them Grasshopper. And grasshoppers only move forward, if you didn't know that. And the idea of a grasshopper only moving forward really captured what Amanda Triolo, she's the owner, what she had in her mind as far as a vision of that particular company. So they came up with this tagline to go along with this grasshopper, is that the tagline is "Forward is a way of life." Okay, so if you think about what that says, not only externally to customers, but internally to their internal customers and their internal employees. So if you can think about what is it about your brand that you want to capture and you want to have people feel about your company, that's a great starting point. And then you try to work around marrying up that visual with what that vision is.
Okay, so Brad Smith has got up here on the screen. His question is, how about, and he's in the chimney sweep business, how about kicking ash?
I think that could be pretty fun, actually. You have to do it in a way that is still professional. But I think if it's branded in a way, like, I would remember that, and it's not like offensive to me, but I would remember it. Like, that almost sounds like a franchise to me.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot of franchise branding and a lot of franchise naming. Mosquito Hunters is one of the brands that we actually created that is a franchise. But like, you're not going to forget that. But if it was Smith, chimney service, why would I remember that? So you have to really think about what will be sticky, what's going to be memorable, certainly as you're thinking about names.
And it's funny as you go through this, as you've been talking, Dan, because Sheryl has a manufacturing company that she has actually rebranded. It started out as Islands by Design. Now we kept the IBD part, which is the first letter, and it now goes by IBD Outdoor Rooms. In the case of CVC, this is my third brand. We started out as Chimney Inventing Consultants. We found out that people called us CVC. So then we went to CVC Coaching. And then as we added more people, we became CVC Success Group. We kept the one constant was the CVC and the IBD, but we went through the branding, the rebranding as it's doing. So Brandi, coming back to you, your last question, but to give you a little background into Dan, his very first client was a chimney sweep. Okay. And that was back in the days when you hand lettered the trucks. That came up right before you got in, but that was before your time. But I can remember when I paid a painter to hand paint on the truck. It was no vinyl at those times. Okay. So what would be your last question of Mr. Antonelli?
I love it. I'm gonna steal 2 questions, but
I found it, Jerry.
Fun.
There
Oh
you
wow.
go. The Firebird chimney sweep. There you go.
That's awesome. So the first question is trademarking. Do you help with trademarking at all of the brand?
So what we do with, as far as trademark is concerned, is when it comes to naming, especially. So naming, part of the process is to do an exploration on trademarks. Obviously, you don't want to pick a name that someone owns the trademark for, or that's going to be a very expensive problem later on that you'll need to attend to. As it relates to trademarking the actual artwork for a particular logo, once the branding is done, we actually don't own the logo anymore or own the rights to it, but we do facilitate the connection between the trademark attorneys that do all our clients' brands. So we just recommend that you hook up with those attorneys. They'll file everything on your behalf and take care of getting the actual artwork itself trademarked. And it's a great question, and it's really important that you do trademark your artwork because theft is rampant, especially on a lot of crowdsourcing sites. We've had, I've lost track of how many brands we've created that have been stolen. The trademark will really give you good legal grounds to pursue cease and desist or damages, whatever you want to do. So protect your intellectual property after it's created. Putting the TM on the logo after it's trademarked does serve as a sort of theft deterrent for most people. It's yours. You want to make sure that you protect that asset.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we trademarked several years ago, probably like 6 or 7 now. And that was really important to me. And so my last question is just a fun question. So if you can tell us, what is the worst brand you've ever had to rebrand? That they were just awful. Or if you don't feel comfortable answering that, is there like a major brand out there now that if you could rebrand them, you would, because you just think it's a horrible name?
I have to think carefully about this because I could get myself in a lot of trouble. Well, I can say rebranding Tommy Mello's was one that I was really excited to do because I knew what Tommy was building was this amazing enterprise. Like, he's going to have the largest home service company in the country soon. Like, he's not quite there yet, but he will. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. So his old truck wraps were pretty awful. Like, he knows it. Like, he's not, like, that's not a secret between us. So I would say rebranding Tommy was definitely one of the ones that I was most excited about redoing because I felt so strongly that what he was personifying didn't actually match what he was delivering. Like, he delivers amazing service in the garage door space. But you couldn't really make that assumption by looking at the way his brand personified itself. As far as ones that I would love to do over, listen, there's a lot of big private equity owned companies that I would love the opportunity to do over. But the real challenge is that most of the times they get bought and the investors are super happy with the return they're getting, and no one really wants to rock that boat. Now that being said, I look at that still as opportunity for competitors because in my view, they're sitting around and they're super complacent with what's going on. So, I admire Tommy in the sense that he was at $30 million in revenue, I think, or $40 million in revenue when we rebranded him. And he could have very easily have just said, what we're doing today is good enough for tomorrow. And why do I need to change? But yet he knew that he could accelerate his growth by investing in that rebrand. And so looking at the market, looking at some very big players, and there's a ton of big players with really awful brands. I mean, there's a ton. There's a let's just say there's a lot on the East Coast, centered around Philadelphia. And if I tell the name, if I say the color of the trucks, it'll give it away. So I won't. But
Dan, you're being very safe answering this question. So when we go offline, I'm going to push you on this when it's just the
okay.
four of us.
Yeah, I can give you a bunch. But you look at that, and then when I have a competitor in those markets, I'm excited about it, because while I know that's the big albatross in that market, I know that they're super complacent. They have no brand story, and there's no brand promise inherent in it, but they spend 10, 12% on marketing because they have to. So what's ironic to me is you could look at some of the biggest home service companies in the space and say, what is your unique brand story? And almost all of them wouldn't be able to tell you one. Gettle would be the exception to that rule. Gettle has a legitimate brand story. That's why Gettle sold for the highest multiple ever in home service. It wasn't a coincidence. Is because they had a legitimate brand and brand story. So yeah, I'll give you a bunch after.
Yeah. So anyway, I think this has been super interesting today. I think we've all learned a little something here. Maybe Brandi's even running through her wheels. Does Flues Brothers need to take a look at this or whatever as it's gone through here? But I'm going to, when we look at this, Dan, a lot of times we look at this as building our brand, possibly scaling, going to a larger size. But there's another side to this, which is protecting your turf. Okay. Because if you don't have a recognizable brand, to be honest with you, I don't think your customer is going to remember you. You're just going to be another guy. You're going to be Joe the plumber. You're going to be Bill the HVAC guy. You're not separating yourself. And I think that's something that people need to look at. Sometimes they're so hard in their comfort zone that things come at them and they're shocked when their business starts falling, because someone else is penetrating that market. And a lot of times we just get mad, but a lot of times it's kind of like our house. We haven't maintained that brand. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. And again, there's just a lot of, sometimes it's just ego tied to their existing brand and they're super proud of it. And maybe they had a relative design it and they don't want to upset the relative, or their nephew did it. A lot of nephews do logos, apparently, I've learned over the years. So totally, but I think, if I look at sort of the characteristics of the clients that we've worked with, these are all owners that are just not satisfied with what they're doing currently. And they know that the brand itself, if they're being really objective and they say, this actually doesn't even represent who we are today anymore. Like, it was fine when we started, but now look at where we are today. And is this really who we are today? Like, is this what we represent to the homeowner today versus where we started? So being introspective about your own branding is definitely part of the process. And just asking yourself those questions. Does it really represent what we deliver every day for our customers? And if it doesn't, then why are we keeping it? Then why are we still using it? When there's definitely ways that we can communicate promise to that customer with a better brand.
That's it. So folks, Dan Antonelli, and let me tell you this is a personal recommendation from someone that all of us know and respect highly. And he mentioned it a while ago, Tommy Mello at A1's Garage Doors. I've asked him before, tell me what has moved you to the level. And Tommy will name them off. And Dan, you're one of the people that's on those 5 fingers when he names off the stuff. And whenever you have Tommy Mello's endorsement, it doesn't get much higher than that. You know that. I know that. We all value that relationship very, very much. I don't know about you, but whenever I was speaking at Vertical Track, I considered that one of the highest honors I had since I had been speaking for years. And I'm sure you felt the same way. So if you want to know more about this, reach out to Dan through, and I've got his website up there. It's under kickcharge.com, and you can go there. You can order his book, Understand This. But it may be something that might just be one of those things that could really separate you, could help you scale, which is a needed ingredient if you're going to scale. But the other side, remember what I said. It's also going to help you maintain your home right now, just like you got to paint your house every once in a while. You got to look at that brand. So, Dan, I want to thank you for your time today, and I want to appreciate everyone joining us here on the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network. This is sponsored by our company, CVC Success Group, and the reason we do this is to share great information with you out there in the field. So plan to join us next week on the next episode of the Chimney and Fireplace